All right, so we finished last week talking about that. We learned that God was created by that Bereshit. He was created, and with His creation, the sky and the earth were created. Um, and let's move on to the next paragraph. The next paragraph reads out in English. And the earth was waste and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Translated into Hebrew, or more accurately in the source language, it reads out: והארץ הייתה תוהו ובוהו, וחושך על פני תהום, ורוח אלוהים מרחפת על פני המים. All right, so let's do first a quick kind of rundown of the words so we know what every word says, and then we'll revisit it again and try to see if we could find some sort of a deeper meaning to those words. So I'm going to run through the words in Hebrew, word by word, so you'll have a practice in Hebrew now. Va'aretz is and the, vav is a connecting letter, ha is the, aretz is land in Hebrew. Haita is a female tense of was in the past. Tohu doesn't exist in modern Hebrew, and you don't really see it in the Bible. You see it maybe one or two times later, much later on, which it doesn't seem like it has the same context. Bohu, again, doesn't exist in modern language. It's loosely, a lot of people say tov vavo to say that things are really disorganized, but we don't have any proof that that's really its real meaning because there's no other corroborating sources, and there's a lot of different translations to it. V'choshech is, again, the connecting word ve. Choshech is darkness. Al pnei is on the face. Tehom is, in modern Hebrew, would be a valley, or more accurately, like a well of some sort. V'ruach is spirit or wind. Elohim is the name of God. Merachefet would be floating, but floating would be in a female tense again. Al pnei, on the face. Hamayim, the water. Okay, so let's revisit that again. So let's read out. So we first met our first physical thing in Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'haaretz. Haaretz is actually our first physical thing that we know was created. Hashamayim, although it's physical, it's almost spiritual because it's not something that is tangible. Although you could get a scientist to explain to you what a sky is, but it seems very spiritual, a lot more than the physical matter that we are. Now, when we look into the Va'aretz Hayta Tohu Vavohu, it seems like the first explanation of what this earth was comes immediately after. And you could see also the original commentators deliberately put here a comment right after Va'aretz Hayta Tohu Vavohu. It's almost like a, by the way, this is what earth was. So the earth was Tohu Vavohu, and when we look at the word Haaretz, something that's really interesting about the letters themselves, that Aleph, the first thing that pops into my head is the first letter of the alphabet. Second thing that pops into my head is the name of God, Elohim. The letter Resh, kind of like, the only thing I could do is try to look and see what connects to the letter Resh, and the letter that I see is Ruach, which is the spirit. So it's almost like a recipe, which we're reading here. Eretz is God. It has two legs. Resh is the Ruach, which is the spirit, which has only one leg. And Tzaddik has one leg, but it's a leg that's deep into the ground. And the letter Tzaddik represents, a lot of times, the word Tzaddik represents Smicha, or Tzemach, which basically is plants in Hebrew. So almost when I'm looking at this word, I'm almost seeing the recipe of God's creating life. And in many ways, what I'm seeing here is to create God, which is the representation of God is something that is very physical. The physicality of God was created in a spiritual way to create life. It's almost the story of Elohim, when you approach God and look at God as an entity, you have 2 feet on the ground. You're looking at it almost in the same way as a scientist looks at things. It's almost like looking into it as some sort of like external force. I'm here, you're there. Thus, I'm standing and looking at you. When you're looking at resh, the word ruach, which very interestingly it starts with a letter that is almost like a funnel into the skies. It's this letter that is like starts. It's like a boomerang. It starts from the bottom, but it's not. It starts on the bottom, and it should be shaky and unstable, right? Because there's all this weight that's coming here on the top here, and there's no support. But at the same time, it seems like this is like your channeling of connecting with God. How do you connect with God? By connecting to your spirituality, by connecting without understanding necessarily, without more than not understanding, without approaching God as an external force. So almost like the story of what land is the story of what God is, or more the story of God creating life. So when you look at this, basically, the two-legged person was created by a spiritual a spiritual bonding to the living plants. So if I would say this, and I'm maybe and I'm looking at this, I would say that man, just from looking at the word eretz, I'm seeing the story of how man, spirit, and nature are all one thing. And by separating them, so it's not land anymore. The land itself, for it to be a land, it's a combination of mammals, the two-legged creatures, the humans, the spirituality, but that spirituality that connects between those, the man, the spirit, and the living, the plants, and understanding that we're all one micro element, we're all one element. And the way we connect is through that ruach, through that spirituality, through that thing that we don't have any legs. You just start at one place and you connect on the other end, and when you do, you're united, you're one. All right, so let's move to the next word. The next word is haita. And haita is really cool. We're kind of seeing here that almost like the first element, the first thing, the first physical thing that exists, although we're saying that was because we're going to describe how it was, and what it was doing. But one thing that stands out is we're learning right now that the land itself is a female, because haita in Hebrew is female. If we wanted to say a male, we would say haya. But it was important, and it was like, this is the first female thing, right? And if we look into the first paragraph, we'll see Bereshit bara Elohim. Bereshit is a manly figure. Bereshit bara Elohim. It's not Bereshit bara Elohim. It's Bereshit created God. Which is very interesting, because now we got a confirmation of what we were learning before, because Elohim, as we could see in the next sentence, is a female. Because the Spirit of God, merachefet, she is floating. And the Spirit of God, she is floating. That means God is a female. The understanding of this spirit, this aspect of God is a female. So when we're looking at this, we see here the story that Bereshit, which was this original source, this original God, or this original energy, or this original creator, created God. And with that, created the sky and the earth. Or maybe the description of what God is the sky and the earth combined. Maybe. And then when we look into the next paragraph, we see that we're getting this explanation of that the it's like that. We're basically, for me, it's a beautiful story, because we're kind of seeing here also, when you look at this and you look at the land itself, the land is a female. And you might think, why is it female? Because what does a female body do? What does a female body do? It creates life. Man can create living. It can get pregnant. It can digest and build and nurture a fetus and until it becomes a baby. What does Earth do? You put a seed inside of the earth. The seed gets water, and the seed then grows into a plant. The land itself not only creates plants, it also created the man. It also created all these other things. So basically, just by these two words together, the haaretz and then haita, we know that you know, the land itself was part of the creation. The land itself was the creator. It was the womb which created life. And we just saw that from just these first two words. All right, so let's look at the next one, which is one that's really hard for me, and it's really hard for a lot of scholars as well. Tohu and vo is in the modern Hebrew means like a complete mess, but we don't really understand what tohu vavo actually mean. But we do know that it's trying to describe what? It's trying to describe the aretz itself. It's trying to describe the land itself. This is not a description of the status of the planet. It's not the description of anything else, because there's a direct connection between Va'aretz haita, the land was, tohu vavo. We don't know really what tohu vavo is. Some say that tohu vavo basically means that everything was so mixed together that there was no way to separate between them. That basically the land itself encompassed all that life and all that organisms and all this everything, that there's no way for them to actually exist on their own. So in some levels they didn't exist. And if you try to look at this in a little bit of a scientific point of view, when scientists went up and started discovering how planets are created, they started to find out that basically as the heat and the temperature changed, and as the core was compressing, and as things were compressing into the core, all these different elements were created. But before those elements were created, it was a complete crazy energy that had no way to actually produce all these amazing things that millions of years after, according to science, created. So when we're talking about Aretz, although today when we think about Earth, we think about picking up some sand at the beach, it doesn't necessarily mean that. It doesn't mean it was a solid. And for me, it kind of looks like it was gases. Because the only way to describe and say that everything was all completely mixed up together in a physical world is to say that everything was still in some sort of, fetus moments of Earth, where Earth was so hot still that it was basically not really solid yet. It was still a ball of energy. So that's what I'm seeing here. And now one thing that is kind of interesting is, if I was God and I was creating the Bible and I was trying to say that status, I would be able to create a word, so that would just describe it. But instead of that, God or whoever wrote this book chose to say two words, tohu and bohu. And not only that, these words are so similar to each other that their differences are very, very, very minute. So when I'm looking at a word like this, I'm saying, why? Why would there be two words to describe one condition? Unless we're trying to get into two different layers of information. And when I'm looking at this, I'm kind of feeling like this word is almost like a puzzle that needs to be solved, which I don't know if I'll be able to solve it on my own. But the one thing that I'm seeing here, that the two letters that stand out are bet and taf, while ho is kind of like almost the letters of God to be in the future, which we're going to look at. We could see that tohu and tehom are very, very similar. Not the same thing, though. Some translators do say that tohu is basically an even extreme case of a well, of a deep, as it's translated. But the way I'm looking at it is, I think there's this explanation here where we're saying that Earth is a female, and we said that Earth is a creator. When we look at tohu vavo, we see a lot of letters that are not needed, but there's two things that stand out. Bohu, inside, this is really amazing. If we break this down just phonetically by the sound, bohu, we hear two words. Inside of him, he is. Inside of it, he is. Basically telling us, inside of this female Earth he was already in there, hidden inside. And tohu, bohu is almost like a puzzle to try to tell you, he was there inside of it. We don't know who that is yet, but he wasn't formed yet. And another interesting thing is, if we take the letter bit and the letter taf and connect them together, we have the word bat, which is basically a girl. And in many ways, we're seeing here a lot of sexuality when I'm looking into this word. We're seeing the letters of God itself. Excuse me, only half of them, right? We have your Hey, Vav, Hey. We're missing still that Yud. So, Jehovah is missing. We're missing that letter Yud to create the full name of God. So it's a missing word. We're seeing a girl inside of here. And we're seeing also Ubo Hu. Inside of him, he is. So in many ways, what I'm seeing here, is that the earth itself was not disconnected from God yet. God was still part of that land. V'choshech, moving on to the next word. V'choshech. Choshech would represent night. Interesting to look at the word itself is that the sound itself is very reminiscent of night. You might not think that if you're reading it in English, because doesn't really, well, it does. Like, it sounds like someone like, it's like sleeping. But in a deeper layer, we see here the choshech. Choshech is the first thing we actually see that's not a physicality, right? We saw the creation of God, the creation of earth, and now we're saying that we say darkness. And it seems like, but there was darkness before, according to what we know, right? There was nothingness. But the one thing that, as someone that programs, as someone that, if you ever learned a programming language, you would know that there's a lot of different types of nothingness. There's a nothingness of, there was nothing here and nothing will ever be here. And then there's a nothingness of, I set a place here for nothing to be inside. And it's kind of an interesting differentiation because most people don't ever think of the idea of different layers, of different levels of nothingness. And basically here we're kind of like saying, there's nothing here, there's darkness here, but it's a set darkness. It's a darkness that was created already. It's not a darkness I set in motion. I put here a strip of darkness. I put here a layer that says here there will be nothing. So the letter itself also kind of like almost comes to tell us that in many ways the sound is not very detailed, but it's kind of like, if you look at it, it has it starts with like the sound that's like a throaty voice, and then you have a sh, which is and a lot of things that pop in my head when I think about the letter shin. If it's shad, which is a breast of a woman. If it's shalosh, which is a 3. We could also see that it's a 3-pronged letter. I can't take it much deeper than that because I don't really know the deeper essence and deeper meaning of the word. But I'm looking at it and I'm curious about why would it have a chaf sofit, a letter that basically is longer, similar to that tzaddik that we saw earlier. Something about that darkness wasn't that darkness that was before. This darkness is connected. It's rooted into this earth that was created now. This is what I'm seeing. All right, so let's move on to the next one. Al pnei, which is on the face. Okay. Al pnei tehom, on the face of this. Literally in modern Hebrew, you probably would say deep. But as some scholars say, which I kind of agree with them, it's almost like on the face of like the nothingness, on the face of the wilderness. It's almost like the face of the moon, the face of emptiness, on the surface, on the open surface, basically. But it's interesting to see that there's this description al pnei tehom, which is on the face of. It's not on. It's on the face of, which kind of tells you, does Earth have a face? Maybe it does. Is Earth a complete organism that actually is, like we're looking at a human body, that a body has a face? Does the Earth itself has a face, which is the exterior part of Earth, while the internal parts are deeper within it? Interesting. Now again, when we look at tehom is almost the same as tohu, and we said that tohu in many ways is almost like a chaos, and mem is usually when you say tehom, it's already connecting to water. With tehom, that means that there's like this deep well, and in that well there's water. In what I'm saying here, because we didn't talk about water yet, I kind of feel like that this tehom is more of the opposite. If we look at v'choshech b'nei tehom, and we're saying that the earth itself had encompassed inside of it the God Himself, that God was or is part of this earth. This darkness on the face of the valley is almost like telling the story, because I'm looking at this saying, like, okay, why would this be important? If God was part of the earth, and the earth was within God, and there was darkness in the exterior surface of earth, I would say it in the exact same way that it's written right now. Basically saying the earth was, mumbling and jumbering, and there was a darkness all around the earth. That's kind of cool. So maybe the perspective is a story of the earth telling the story, and not the story of a third party looking at the creation of the earth, but the story of the creation from within the creation itself. All right, moving on. Veruach, and the spirit, which is a really powerful word. And ruach is also, by the way, wind. And based on old Judaism, and to be honest, also most religions, and even ancient religions kind of believe that the wind itself had powers of its own, and we could see that today. You don't have to be a scientist to see that winds are so powerful that no one has control over them. That not only no one has control over them, it's probably one of the most surprising elements. As much science tries to figure out what will wind do, wind does whatever it does. And in many levels, we're kind of breaking down now all these different physicalities. From we had the earth, the layer above it now is darkness, the layer above it now is wind, or spirit, which I think they're very, very much connected to each other. And we're saying that ruach Elohim, and the spirit of God, or the wind of God, is floating on the surface of the water. And again, we're seeing here that one thing that's kind of interesting is if we would describe the wind, and the wind was just something that would be a destroyer. Many times when we try to describe something that's a destroyer or a violent thing, we would call it in a male, a male sound. Wind, powerful, masculine. But not here. We're saying that the ruach Elohim merachefet, the wind is a female. Thus, if we're saying that a wind is a female, then we're trying to say that the wind was a creator. Because if we're using in the story of the creation deliberately the word ruach, we're saying that this story of God floating on top of the water isn't the story about God floating on top of the water, because that would be silly. Like, that isn't really part of the story of creation, unless it is part of the story of creation. So then we're saying here that according to the Bible, that the story of creation started, the land was fertile, full of energy, full of life, but it was mixed together in a level that couldn't create anything. Then there was darkness on the surface of the land. And a wind started. And the wind blew on the surface of the water. Kind of like telling us the story of how Earth became a place that things could live in it. So it started from this violent place that nothing could live in it. Then there was darkness on the surface of the land, and it's really important to say you're on the surface, because it's totally not dark in the middle of the core of Earth. It's blowing hot. It's red. It's light. There's no darkness there. So it's interesting to say is that the story is so accurate that we're saying here that Earth was a complete fire and brimstone, and then it was darkness on the surface of Earth, and then the Spirit of God, or actually literally written, and then there were winds, and the winds were surfing on the face of the water, which, as we all know, the oceans are in charge really of creating the winds of the world. not only that they're in charge of that, those winds are then also, they create the clouds, they create the rain, and so on and so forth. So one thing though that's really interesting here is that we're using the same reference when we're saying merechefet, and then we move on to the next word al pnei. Again, we're saying on the surface. We're not talking about what's happening deep inside. We're saying on the surface of the water, God's wind, or the wind of life, or the wind of nature, is floating. Very, very, very interesting. And that's our class for today. Mime. Well, let's just say mime, which is a really beautiful word, mime, where hamaim, it's the water, but mime in both directions are the same thing. And if you look at it, mime has only two components, and as you know, water is created out of two components as well. And if you could look at it, and we could see that mem itself is, I don't want to go into places where we don't see any connection with what's actually written, but some say that there's supposedly 40 different gates to God, supposedly to 40 different ways to approach God. So supposedly that water is one of those gates, or water represents all of those gates, and that's why you could see within them the word mem, and you could see within them yud, which is that letter that was missing when we were looking at tohu vavoh. So we're looking at tohu vavoh. We saw here all the letters to create the name of God that we haven't seen yet, and really the connecting of it is with the water itself. So when we take that tohu vavoh and you add water into it, now you have the full creation. Now you have the full God. It's still hidden. We're still talking about God as a female spirit, and not as that Yud Kei Vav Kei, as we find out about it in later chapters. So this is all I have for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Please add your comments. I still have some open thoughts about choshech, which I don't feel like I gave a really good answer on that. And maybe there's a few other words like to dig deeper into their meaning of ruach and merechefet, of why are these letters these way. But I would love to hear from you, and I think this one, we got enough meat into this, and hopefully as we go, we're going to dig deeper and deeper into this.